Lloyd. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Do you mind starting by just introducing yourself to everybody, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lloyd Groom. So basically, I was working up until about 18 months ago in corporate for about sort of 15 years, and ultimately sort of was made redundant, actually, unfortunately, about 9 months ago. So that sort of almost kick-started my sort of journey really within property. I'd already been interested in property and was already doing stuff within property as a sideline for about sort of 6, 7 years, Shona. So was working with a lot of sort of estate agents and the like, just to sort of do property inventory reports.
Mm-hmm.
So that was going on the side of sort of working in corporate, but gave me a good insight into the world of sort of like buy-to-let renting, really, because I was going in and doing a lot of the inventories for these properties that estate agents kept instructing me to do. And then when I was made redundant, I was almost of the opinion, shit, why am I doing these inventories? It should be me that's looking at sort of like owning these properties. And it was almost like a light bulb moment, really. But the great thing with that experience has been that you've got to sort of see what properties rent better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Little things within properties that make properties a little bit more appealing,
Mm-hmm.
to want to stay in them a little bit longer. So yeah, I've been in property for about 18 months properly, but unofficially for probably about the last 6, 7 years. But that's, as I say, not been directly related to owning anything or working and managing anything. So yeah, I was in corporate for 15 years, never really had the heart for it, if I'm being honest, had no real sort of passion for it. And I think we've spoken once previously about this, haven't we? That if you decide to do anything in life, unless you've got a passion for it, I think inevitably it's going to catch up with you at some point in the future. And to do anything with 100% commitment and focus and all the rest, I think you have to have, a burning passion to do what you do. And that's property for me. I've always wanted to do property, and that journey has started to speed up a little bit more now that I've got 100% focus and attention on it and don't have any sort of side distractions. So yeah, basically working in the East Midlands, we do a lot of sort of rent to rent and sourcing within the East Midlands, based in Kettering. So the likes of Leicester, Nottingham, Derby, all these sorts of places are on our doorstep, really. So we work with quite a few investors to try and get them a good return, as a lot of us do in property. And yeah, at the moment, just all about building that cash flow. So I've got a good, consistent sort of ongoing monthly cash flow that can then just be eventually reinvested into our own sort of projects and our own assets. And yeah, that's brought us to where we are today, really.
Fantastic. So you mentioned that you've got quite a good cash flow coming in. Could you explain a
Yeah.
little bit about how you've come to have that cash flow coming in from property?
Yeah. So basically, I went into this very blindly, really. I was just always of the opinion that with property, you had to sort of the old traditional buy to let, save 25% deposit to put down on a property. Then, if you were fortunate enough to do that, refinance and go again. And that was the only route that I ever thought was available in property, until I started to sort of get a bit more educated, going on a lot of courses like a lot of us do, and then came across rent to rent strategy. So I had a bit of training with a couple up in Nottingham, and I've joined a couple of other groups and sort of taken nuggets really from each of the separate sort of individual groups, applied that to business myself. So yeah, just to give an overview, I mean, typically on a buy to let, I mean, we look at around about £200-300, don't we, as a sort of like profit, let's say, from a buy to let property per month. But you've got that as a long term capital appreciation, haven't you?
Yeah.
When I looked at it, I always thought, well, that seems really, you're investing all that money up front for very small return immediately, and that's not going to get me out of work straight away. It's gonna, unless I'm getting investor finance, that's not going to get me out of where I want, where I am currently. So when I sort of first was introduced to rent to rent, I sort of then thought, well, surely the ultimate would be to combine the two. So you're building your assets, if you're able to in that position, but also have the cash flow at the same time. Because as we all know, if you've not got any cash flow, the noose is just going to tighten around your business. So yeah, first one we got was in Kettering, which is where I live. That was dead opposite the hospital. So that appealed straight away to the tenant type that we wanted, which was professionals, junior doctors that are working in that hospital.
Hmm.
So when the hospital has the secondments every 6 months, there's new tenants that are always coming into the country. So that's always been filled sort of from day one. So that generates around about £500 profit, total profit after we've taken out all our expenses. So once we'd started to understand the process, don't get me wrong, it wasn't all plain sailing. We actually wanted a little bit more profit than that actually off our first deal, but through inexperience, we'd actually mismanaged one of the room sizes. So great lesson learned from our first project, which was 6.52 square meters as a minimum for a double, and we were just sort of convincing ourselves, yeah, no, this box room, it's definitely 6.52 square meters. And then when we finally got the tape measure out, we were like, oh no, it's not. So we'd lost the cash flow on that one room. So it had gone from about an £800 profit to 500.
Yeah.
So it's just all great things, isn't it? I think, we all say that you're always learning, aren't you? And the biggest lesson for me was it's just finally just dip your toe, and then there's no better experience, no better lesson than experience. So that's taught us now that lesson for any properties that we look at in future. So
Take your tape measure, right?
absolutely, yeah. Take your laser measure. I'm always there, just sort of like measuring up against the walls, and then you get a good feel, obviously, for what is a bedroom that conforms to those regulations. But when it's tight, there's been times when I've gone into properties in Leicester and I've thought, this is, I don't know whether or not this is big enough, but then you're able to verify that just through that bit of knowledge that you've learned, experience, get out a laser measure, and very quickly you can say, right, that's a box room, it's never going to be a double. I can't sort of advertise that as an extra bedroom. So still great learnings, but then we just sort of started to look a bit more over Leicester way. It's very, very close to where we live, and that's just purely because it worked quite well for the strategy, Jonas. So you've got a good couple of universities in the city,
Mhm.
very, very close to the train station, which is on a direct line straight through into St Pancras. And then you've got a lot of sort of like professionals, etc., in the city as well. A lot of big companies in the city. So that really sort of forced us to look at Leicester, but also as the first pandemic hit was when I was first starting to look at rent to rent properly. And that was a great time, and it still is, to sort of like do rent to rent, because there was a lot of landlords and a lot of pain. So whereas before they probably wouldn't have entertained you because they could have held out for like a decent gross rental and a good profit on their properties, we were speaking to a lot of landlords in Leicester that were just relying every single year on the returning sort of international students. So a lot of Chinese that,
Mhm.
because of the pandemic, just weren't going to return.
Yeah.
So when it got to about sort of September, October time of last year, a lot of these landlords were starting to panic. They were like, these rooms that historically we've had let through the agents were starting to panic. So as you can appreciate, they were then very open to listening to what you had to say to them.
Mm.
So we took on 3 properties in Leicester last year. They all generate sort of around about a minimum £600. So it's building quite nicely. It's nowhere near where we want to get to. It has its pressures. It's very hands-on from a management point of view because we do rent-to-rent HMO.
Mhm.
So, we have to find the tenants. It's not like SA where I can put a key box on a wall and the tenants can let themselves in. It is quite sort of full on a management side. But ultimately, for us, it's not a short term, but it's a strategy to run alongside what we want to do. It's going to be there to generate cash flow, which we can then reinvest into other areas as and when we grow as a business. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I was going to ask, the room that wasn't big enough to be used as a double, does that mean you
Yeah.
rented it as a single?
No, we'd advertised it as a double, so we'd always sort of held out for that sort of that amount really. But what we did was, because we'd actually noticed that obviously a lot more people were wanting to work from home, we just turned it into a computer room for the 3 junior doctors.
Okay.
So they loved that, and they were prepared to pay a little bit more on their actual room rates themselves because they actually had that and they needed that at home. So it was just as the first lockdown hit. So again, now great lessons that going forwards, is there enough room in the bedrooms to sort of create a space for somebody to have a desk and work from home? Is there a communal area or a second reception room area where you can convert that into a little office space for people? And that's just been things that I think as and when we go through this journey, we're always learning, aren't we? You can hopefully I'll get a point in, say, a year, 2 years time, when you've got the absolute ultimate sort of like model for all of this. But yeah, we messed up. I'll hold my hands upon that. We messed up on that first property that we did.
That's okay.
But
It's all part of the learning, like you say.
absolutely, absolutely. And when I speak to other people, I just always say to them now, it's like, if I can help in any way, and I can just sort of, because I've walked that path 9 months probably before somebody else who's just about to do that. This is the thing I think I spoke to you before about, Shona, which is property. I find so refreshing in the sense that in a corporate world, only talking from my own experience, everybody was really always out for their own sort of best interest
Hmm.
to further their own sort of like career. And there was never any real sort of sharing as such. I mean, no one would give you the amount of free advice, knowledge, experience that people happily give in property. And I guess that's why I know I've found my sort of place really in life, because you're constantly surrounded by people that are sometimes ultra successful people in what they do, but they'll still give you as much time as you need. I think so long as you show that you're willing, you want to learn, you want to become educated, and you want to be a success, it's so refreshing, isn't it, to sort of like speak to people that will happily give you that knowledge and information.
Yeah.
Um,
Would
so
you
yeah,
mind, so anyone that's watching this that might be interested in rent to rent, they probably heard the term over and over, and they know that they're going to rent a property for a price and then they're going to rent out the rooms. Could you break down as clearly as possible how you work out how much to offer the landlord, and then all those other costs you have to keep in mind to work out how much profit you're going to make?
yeah. So I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. And this again is just really, I can't take full credit for it. I have to sort of like, and I will. I'll give a shout out to Sarah at Cogito, and also there's a couple up in Nottingham, Justin and Ray Ingrid, that have been super helpful in my journey. Um, so I've taken bits and adapted it, and not gone 100% specifically with what I've been taught. I've sort of almost morphed it into one sort of specific route for myself. But the main things I think have always remained the same. I was taught to always allow about £100 for bills per person in the house from my mentors up in Nottingham. And that works out around about the same from what I've been taught from Sarah at Cogito as well. So working out a property price, always start with the gross rental in mind. So take the amount of bedrooms that you've got. So let's say, for argument's sake, you've got 5 rooms at £500 that you're going to be able to get on the rent per month. So that's £2,500. Then take off £65 per person for utilities in that property. Okay, then allow £20 for maintenance per person. So 5 times 20, what's that? That's what's my maths? It's first thing in the morning, Shane.
5 times 10 is 100.
As you can tell, it's first thing in the morning. I've got a tea. I should have had a strong coffee.
I couldn't do the 65 times 5. Times it by 10.
I think so. It's about 300, something like that.
25. It's 325.
Yeah.
The other one, 425.
Then you've got council tax as well. That's if you've got professionals in the property. If you've got students, then you don't have to apply council tax. So you can actually have that waived by the council. Then broadband, take off for broadband, typically around about sort of £40-50. And then we would allow for sort of like a cleaner to go into the property a couple of times a month, which would usually be about 50 quid for the month. So whatever's then left, you've still got to work with. Obviously, you want to take off for, say, voids as well. Worst case scenario might be that you never experience any voids, but at least if you start with that in mind, that is going to happen, it will happen. Certainly with students, for instance, 10 months of the year, 2 months are going to be empty when they return home. So that's just students as an example. But when you're turning over rooms, there's always going to be a couple of weeks turnaround. So building into voids, what we do is we'll take the gross rent, let's say, so 2,500 was the gross rent per month. We would times that by 12. That's for your annual rent. And then we would divide, actually, you know what? Sorry, let me just work this out. There is a formula, trust me. It's the gross rent, 2,500 quid divided by 12 would give us an idea of what the void would be that we'd have to sort of build into it. So 2,500 divided by 12, £208 per month I would allow within those figures for my void period.
Right.
And whatever's left would be what I can offer to the landlord. Ultimately, though, I want to be saving or achieving a minimum £100 profit per person per room.
Yeah, so 500 for that particular example.
500 would be my minimum, but it may be that after I've done those calculations we just mentioned, I might have 800. So I would go in initially with that figure to generate me 800 as a profit. That would be my first offer. It might get rejected, but I know that I've got a bit of wiggle room to move down to say 700, 600, 500 profit. Worst case would be my, final offer.
Yeah.
And that's it really.
And what about in terms of, I'm assuming that you couldn't move the tenant straight in. You had to do some works on the property. How do you work?
Yeah. So and again, this again, I think is great lessons to where I've got to currently, Jonah, in the sense that I've had two sort of different schools of thought really from people on how best to approach this. And I think both work really, really well. So if you are targeting people in an Article 4 area, let's say, Article 4 obviously being, where there's the ban on where you can actually sort of like go and set up a HMO if it's in a built-up sort of area like city centre in Birmingham or places in like Nottingham and places like that. So you're quite restricted on what you can actually do with that property. So I was taught in that sort of scenario to target existing HMO owners, and that's what we've done in Leicester. So the reason for that is because there's already a HMO license in place. All the fire doors are already there. All the smoke alarms and everything are already there. Those particular examples have been landlords that have worried because they didn't have the returning students, but they were also landlords that had run out of funds to reinvest into the property to keep it to a standard. I think now that's really a minimum requirement now. These were landlords that probably hadn't sort of updated their properties since the 80s, early 90s, shown it. And it's like, I think of it as almost stereotypical landlord from the 70s, student landlords that were quite happy to let students go into a property that was damp, dingy, thinking that that was the norm. But obviously, as we all know now, people are getting far more educated, more people are doing this, and the standard's being raised. So typically on the rent to rent, you don't want to be investing too much. Strategy is all about maximum return for the least amount of investment. So we really wouldn't be doing any more than sort of, if we had to, carpets where necessary, because that makes a big impact when someone comes into a property. You see a new carpet, you instantly fall in love with the rooms or property. That's a big selling point that we try and put in where we need to into any properties. And then generally we'll just sort of paint throughout, and that will consist of things like feature walls. So if I go into a room and it's pretty decent, I wouldn't sort of like get my painters to do all four walls. It would just be a nice, decent sort of bold feature wall in one of the rooms just to make it sort of bright and sort of stand out. And that would be it really from an investment point of view. Obviously you've got things like your furniture that you're going to need to sort of pay for as well, but you can be creative with that. You can go on places like Marketplace and buy stuff that's secondhand to keep your costs down if you're only just entering into the strategy. So yeah, I mean, it's you want to be spending the least amount of money possible to make a property look presentable. So, if places like the Range and B&M and these sorts of type places, you can buy things to furnish a property and not have to spend thousands, And also, if you go into a property, I've learnt that when we first started doing this, I was just thinking, right, we're going to rip out everything, we're going to put in our own stuff and put our own stamp on this, which is so the wrong way to look at it. It's like now I go around and I'm like, right, I can keep that. I can keep that. I can use those sofas. I'll just put an extra sort of, I'll put a throw over those sofas there. I don't need to spend like 150 quid on a new sofa. I can just buy a throw from Dunelm and put it over that, and that's 15 quid as opposed to 150 quid. Um, and things like beds as well. Bed frames, I'll just keep the bed frames if they're presentable and probably just get new mattresses if I have to. So I'm thinking differently already within the space of 9, 10 months. I'm now thinking totally differently to how I was a year ago, which was, right, we've got to do a massive trip to IKEA. We've got to buy a full matching sort of like set of furniture. And then you've got things like, you know, your shops to Wilco's where you're buying your cutlery and all this sorts of type stuff, to your kettles, toasters, and all that sort of type standard stuff. But we keep it in an inventory list shown. And so our process is getting a lot slicker now, in the sense that before we'd spend hours walking around places thinking, oh yeah, yeah, we need one of those, we need one of those. But now we've got a defined list of what we need in the property, so we can take that. And ultimately, at some point, I want to be able to sort of step back and just be able to say to someone, right, that's our list. You know, and this is through learning from other people. This is the list that we need. That's your responsibility to go and get that list and dump that at the property, where I've then got somebody else who can say, build something or break those packs down, put that cutlery into the respective areas of that property, so that you can run the business as opposed to being too involved in the business.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate aim. So we're not at that point yet, but that's where we're aiming to hopefully get to at some point in the future.
Systems are really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of, so think about the last rent to rent that you've set up. How
Yeah.
much did you spend roughly to get that one ready?
So we would have spent around about 3,000 on that. And that was a 7-bed HMO, by the way. So
That's pretty good.
it was good. Yeah. And that's because of the lessons that we learned. And also, as you're going along, again, people are so sort of helpful with contact. We're always sort of building our contact. And I knew a few people that were already in Leicester, and I've developed pretty good relationships now with agents that are quite happy to share their maintenance teams with you as well. And the reason for that is, I think that they like to have an eyes and ears on the ground going into the property to make sure you're doing what you say you're doing. But we were able to stick in like carpets throughout a 7-bed, 3-story HMO for £1,100. So there's no, you know, underlay on that, but it didn't need it. It was a student property. So, but it made a massive, massive difference. And I think just when I first went into this, I wasn't thinking so much of, right, we've got to keep costs as low as possible. Like we were saying before, we want the maximum return for the least amount of investment.
Mm.
And I've always got a figure now of around about £3,000-4,000 in my head is an absolute maximum that I want to be spending on that property, but from an initial investment point of view. So I know when we talk about sourcing rent-to-rent properties, usually we wouldn't want to source anything unless someone would be able to get their money back out, you know, unless it's within the first 12 months. But we look at it, we want our money back out from an investment point of view within the first 6 months.
Well, I was going to say, so on your example of if you got a minimum of £500 a month,
Yeah.
and you spent £4,000, then it would take you 8 months to get that
Correct.
back, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if it was £3,000, exactly that, we're on that 6 months
Yeah.
of return on our investment. You know, so we're just trying to get to the point where that's building and building and building. And we're looking at sort of other strategies as well. But again, one of the big things I've really, really struggled with, it's just there's so much information that's out there, which is brilliant. But I think sometimes it can really be it can be quite daunting, can't it? And quite intimidating. You're trying to sort of learn so much. I'm so keen to learn, and there's just so much to learn. Sometimes I've looked at this quite a lot over the last 4 or 5 months, and it's probably affected my progress, Shona, because it's the old classic magpie syndrome. You know, the shiny penny syndrome.
Yeah.
I've always been looking at what other people do on social media, and we do, don't we? We compare ourselves to others, and I think I've learned that that's not good for my own mental health, first and foremost. Um, but you're only on this journey yourself, aren't you? And people say to me all the time, "Well, you should only be comparing yourself to what you were doing this time last week, or yesterday, or 6 months ago." And it's so true, because now we've got a clear, defined what we want to do. We're now starting to see better results, because we would start doing one thing one week, rent to rent, and then we'd be like, right, we want to now look at commercial to residential opportunities. Bit of a jump there, but we weren't staying clear on our path of where we wanted to get to. And I think if this goes out to anybody, I'd just sort of say, identify what your strategy is and just stick to it until you've mastered that one strategy.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
I
Don't overcomplicate things.
With me, I know that I want to build the property school. But yeah, I watch all these videos. I'm like, oh, you could do this to make some money. But I
Yeah,
already have a full-time job. So every time I think, oh, I could do this to make a little bit of extra money now, what I'm actually doing is taking time away from working towards the bigger goal, because I've already got enough money coming in. Yes, I would like more, but I
mm,
don't need more right now. If I just focused on the end goal, I'd get there a lot quicker than trying to do all
absolutely.
these other little things to make a few £100 or £1,000 here and £1,000 here. It's like, maybe I need to refocus.
Yeah, no, I think it's so easier said than done, though, isn't it? Because I still find myself guilty of it, and it's like the horse, the racing horses that have the blinkers, isn't it? Almost sort of need to keep your horse racing blinkers on sometimes, and sort of say, "That's my end goal. I don't need to sort of be looking at the distractions to the left and right of me. If I know that this is what I want to get to from a cash flow perspective per month," as Sarah says, work it back, put systems in place to work that figure back, so that you know how to break that down and achieve that figure and number.
Mhm.
So for us, it's like a cash flow. We want to get to 5 grand cash flow as quickly as possible. We work that back on, right, what's the average that we're generating per rent property? The old classic, how many viewings do we need to do to get to those amounts of property? How many calls, how many direct to vendor letters
Mm.
do we need to be sending out? And once you've got that in place, you've got something then to drive the business, haven't you? But then also you can measure the business as well. So I've just sort of found, especially in the past, I haven't done that. I've not implemented that within the business. It's only now that we've implemented that and we're sticking to things religiously that we're starting to see traction and good sort of feedback. So um, yeah, it's just find it very, very. It's almost like sometimes my head will feel like it's going to pop, because I just want to sponge so much information from so many areas. But now I'm just very, very conscious and quite selective of where I get that information from. Because if I'm not careful, it's just almost like my brain feels sometimes like it just wants to explode, Jonah.
Mm. Would you mind talking a bit about, you said that you've got investors which you give back a good return.
Yeah,
So if you were making £500 a month profit from your project,
yeah,
how much of that goes back to an investor to pay them back plus their interest, and then what are you left with? Do you know what I mean? I'd like
yeah.
people
I'll
don't
be
know
honest.
the max.
We have with our rent to rents, we
Yeah.
actually haven't needed to use investor finance. So
Okay.
I would be um, not telling the entire truth if I was to sort of say that's a return that we give our investors. We haven't done it with investor finance. What we did was we've started off with a little bit of capital that we had and used that to sort of like get our first few properties. But then what we then did was we sought properties as well. So as we started to get better at identifying properties, and because we were speaking to direct to vendor opportunities, often they would then speak to, say, other landlords that they knew,
Mhm.
um, that would then sort of tell them a little bit more about what we did. We would get sort of like referrals and people contacting us.
That's brilliant.
So when we talk about the sort of like interest that we can offer, that's really with regard to investment opportunities that we have that are like HMOs. So we'll say, for instance, I was chatting to somebody the other day. Unfortunately, it hasn't materialised, but we've just parked that for the time being. It's not a dead duck. It's timings aren't right. So we've just done a sort of part that opportunity. But basically, it was an ex-boss of mine who I hadn't really spoken to for about 3 years, who was watching what I was posting
Yeah.
on social media. This whole classic, people are always watching what you're doing. And it can sometimes be quite demoralizing, can't it? Because you think, oh, I'm getting nowhere. No one's really sort of interested in what I've got to say. But the amount of people that are actually watching you, and and the point being here is this is a classic example of that. This guy, as I say, hadn't spoken to him for 3 years, and it completely out of the blue just contacted me just off the back of a few bits we were posting on social media about our rent-to-rent properties. And he just said, what's this that you're getting involved in and stuff? And I just gave him a bit of an idea and sort of said, look, we can offer X returns to our investors. And he'd been interested in getting into property himself. He's been in the corporate world for 30 years, let's say, but is now at that age where he's starting to look at what he wants within the next 5 years for him and his wife, which is to take his foot off the pedal a little bit in the corporate world and start to enjoy life a little bit more. So he doesn't want to just go into that completely blindly. And he wanted to sort of like invest with us for the first 12 months to see how that went, how that process actually works.
Mhm.
And then the interest that we were going to actually generate for him, he was then going to use that along with his initial investment in 12 months. But it was almost a sort of like learn and that's the expression, I think, learn and earn, isn't it? They say, which is he could see firsthand what we were doing, learn from that, and then apply it himself in 12 months' time.
Yeah.
But we would actually be offering him a 10% return, so it was a really healthy return actually. Because one thing I've learned is I was putting marketing out there everywhere, showing us sort of like we can offer returns of this 10%, 10%. So of course, what happened was as soon as I said to him, I said, "Well, what sort of returns are you looking for?" He went, "Well, 10%, obviously." So that's one thing I've learned, which is don't disclose that because as we've been taught, and it's so true. Someone might be happy with 6%, someone might be happy with 7%. So why do yourself out of that 3% just for the sake of not thinking about what you're posting? So yeah, he wanted 10%, but then again, I'm always of the opinion 10% is better than nothing, isn't it? I'd happily give away 10% to an investor if that meant that I could say borrow 100 grand from them to do what we want to do to grow our portfolio.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying nothing from 6%. Do you know what I mean? It's like I've never really understood that argument of 6% or 10%. Yes, every day of the week I'm going to go for 6% because we obviously sort of like hold a bit more profit in a deal. But if that means that I don't get that property and I can't then sort of like accelerate our journey, then it's irrelevant as far as I see it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
And in terms of obviously rent to rent is good for cash flow, but you've guaranteed a rent for a certain amount of time, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you like to purchase properties and build assets as well? But basically you'd run exactly the same as you are now, right? But you'd have
Yeah. Well, there's a great, and this is a shout out to another contact within Rent to Rent. There's a chap who I connected with, really, really decent guy. He's very successful in Rent to Rent. And again, this goes back to the whole people being willing to share what they've learned, which again is so refreshing. And a chap called Giuseppe Leone, who does Rent to Rents down in Bristol, actually. He's got about 30 Rent to Rent shown. And he said to me, and this is something that we want to apply. For me, it's the perfect business model because he's got 30 rent to rents, but every 10th rent to rent that he did, cash flow that's been generated from his portfolio of rent to rent properties, he's siphoning X within that sort of like portfolio that's growing. Every 10th one, he will then take on a HMO or a property for himself because they are then paying down the rent to rent cash flow that's coming in is paying the mortgages on those assets that he's acquiring. And I thought, what a fantastic business model that is, because ultimately that cash flow, the great cash flow off rent to rent, which is he's not giving up on rent to rent, he's going to continue building his rent to rent portfolio because of the cash flow that's continually growing. But then, like he was saying, every 10th one he looks to take on a property for himself. And the cash flow off the rent to rent pays down the mortgages. on his assets. So at some point in the future, he will just have, say, X amount of assets owned outright, mortgages paid off through his rent to rent business. So that is something that I would love to apply to our business. And again, then you've got the benefit of both worlds, haven't you? You've got your assets that are building, but then you've got the cash flow as well at the same time. Not all your cash flow is tied up in projects, and you've got no money within the business, which is what I hear some people that I speak to. They'll say, "Well, we've run out of money. We can't accelerate our journey because we don't have the money," and that's because the cash flow tap's been turned off. So you need to have the two, don't you? And I think that's such a great model that pays for this, and then you're going to end up in the future with God knows how many assets that are paid, owned outright, are appreciating, but your cash flow is never affected. That's just growing and growing and growing. Really, really good strategy. I just thought that was really genius, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in numbers, how much would that be? Because yeah, so it has to be like 10, because say he's making
Yeah,
500 on each, that's 5 grand a month.
yeah,
Because you don't want to use all your cash flow for that, because you've also got to live off of that cash flow, right? Because you're not having any,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
you've also got to grow a deposit.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think in that particular example, he was still working to start with.
mm,
So he was able to grow some pretty decent foundations to start with within the business before he then had to start relying on that as his main source of income. He'd obviously done it tactically
yeah.
to get to a certain point where it was like, right now, this is generating X. I can step back from my corporate position. I don't need that anymore. Job done. It's got me out of work. It's created that financial freedom, I guess, which is what people always referred to. It got him to that point, but then it was only ever going to go one way after that, which was just to continue to grow.
Do you, obviously you were forced to, because you're made redundant, you had to do it full time property. If you had
Yeah,
a choice, would you have left full time employment while you started building your rent to rent business, or would you have
no,
started working? Yeah, okay.
I would have, yeah, I would have stayed working, and the reason for that is because I think it's it's great to have the two because then you've got a bit of you've got a buffer, you've got a safety blanket behind you. So anything that your rent to rent business is generating can just be going and growing a nice sort of pot whilst you're sort of like living off your salary. Let's say from your 9 to 5 PAYE, you can be living off that, but what else you're building, growing over here can be starting to grow something nice within the business. And I think as well, especially at the moment when you're starting out as well, Shona, if you've got, say, you want to get involved in, say, buy to let projects, for instance, there's going to come a point when a mortgage lender wants to look at how you can repay that property, that mortgage. And I think just having that PAYE behind you when you first start out
Yeah.
is super, super helpful in that circumstance because you can just sort of say to them, right, I've got a PAYE job, no real sort of questions asked. Yes, they're going to sort of still ask a lot of questions, even more so at the moment with everything that's going on in the world. They're scrutinising everything. And that's just from conversations with people that I know that have got buy-to-let properties already. They're finding that they're being more and more scrutinised now on the lending criteria from these mortgage companies. So I think in answer to your question, yeah, if I was able to, and the circumstances hadn't sort of dictated to the way I went, I would have stayed in my career purely for that reason, which is my rent to rent business could be growing. I could be letting that grow whilst I'm surviving on my sort of like PAYE 9 to 5. But then that actual having a job, knowing that I actually had a 9 to 5 job, it's crazy, isn't it? But the mortgage lenders just see that, I think, as a bit more security from their end because
Had a-
I've never really truly understood that.
If you were working full time, would you have put yourself as into the rent to rent as you had?
No,
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 you might not have grown as
no.
much as you have so quickly.
Yeah. So it has its flaws, it has its clawbacks because it's almost like, right, it's like, right, I'm completely in control of my own destiny. And I'm also a family man. I've got 3 children. So the pressure starts to be ramped a little bit. You think, I've got to get myself out there. I've got to start to be more active on social media and stuff, getting letters out to landlords and picking up the phone. Whereas I might have been maybe if it was just still in a career, would I have sort of picked the phone up as much as I probably do? No, because where's the motivation? Where's the drive? I'm a driven person anyway, but I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't have had as much drive to have picked the phone up, because I know I have to earn, A, to provide for my family, but also B, to grow my business.
Mm,
So it's a
great.
bit of a catch-22 really, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I know you've got to go in a minute. So just my
That's
last
all right.
question for you would be, if somebody was just interested in property, they don't
Yeah,
really know much about it, but they know they want to get into it, what would be your advice to them?
get educated. Massively. Best advice ever, get educated, because it can be a really costly business if you don't. You can go into it, and spend thousands sometimes just through bad decisions. And I mean, get educated, because when you get educated, you'll then meet people that are on the same journey. You'll start to network with people that are very happy to sort of share knowledge, experience with you, that will limit the sort of potential damage you could do to your business from the outset. So 100% just get educated, and that can, it doesn't have to be tens and tens of thousands of pounds. I've seen, and I've been to, some seminars where I know people are charging excessive, extortionate amounts of money. Just do your own due diligence, look things up online, and where there's grey areas, just reach out to people in property. And the majority of the time, if people think that you're passionate and you want to be successful, in my own experience, most people are then quite happy to give their time, not completely free, but you can take nuggets, can't you, and then just sort of try and fill in the grey areas as best you can, off your own sort of research, really. But 100% get educated, just so that you don't sort of fall into any traps, pitfalls that could cost you, lots and lots of money.
How do you know where to get the education? Because there are so many providers, and
There is,
that's
yeah.
the difficult thing, to know who to listen to and who to not listen to.
Absolutely. Really good question. And I guess I could be accused of this. Um, people often refer to it. I think it's quite funny actually. They say, you're a course junkie, and you go around to all these courses, and you sort of see people that have been on about 5 or 6 different courses, and they're almost rabbits in headlights, because they don't want to pull the trigger and take action on the knowledge that they've been taught. It's a really good question. I think you can only really sort of, personally, if I had my time again, when I first made my decisions on what courses to go to, that was off the back of recommendations from people that I knew that were already doing this and doing it successfully.
Yeah.
Not just doing it and saying, right, I'm doing property. And my first sort of decision was basically off the back of somebody that I knew that was doing buy to let successfully up in St Helens.
Hmm.
So I was always conscious of where I was getting my advice from, Shona. And that's the one bit of advice that I would give, would be, yes, there's hundreds and hundreds of different people out there doing courses, but I would just do my due diligence on those people. I would be asking, right, what portfolio have they got, and looking for that experience that they've got, and just seeing how many people are following them. I'd look to sort of see how credible they were as a business before parting sometimes with thousands of pounds.
Mm, good advice. All right. Thank you so much, Lloyd. I really
That's all right.
time. You've been very helpful, and come back anytime.
Oh no, most definitely. This is what it's all about, isn't it? It's all about this. It's all about networking and getting out there. And I mean, we've only known each other now for what, probably 5, 6 months, just through the courses that we're on together.
Yeah, but I think our first conversation, like a proper conversation, was only a couple of weeks ago as well. Even though
Absolutely.
we've talked online for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I love about you guys as well, showing yourself, is you've got a clear passion on what you want with your business, haven't you? And I think that's super, super helpful, because I think, as you've said to me before, and I think it's so true, once you've got that and people can see that you're trying to create something that you're so passionate about,
Mm.
I think then it's just a matter of time before that then starts to really attract to investors.
Fingers
So
crossed it'll happen soon.
yeah. So if anybody's watching this, yeah.
Investors, talk to me.
There's, yeah. There's your free plug, Shona.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. I did not tell him to say that, guys.
Oh no, she didn't. But I think it's quite evident in what you're trying to create, which is a super, super project.
Thank you.
For kids that that are, from what you've told me, are sometimes from not the most privileged circumstance or background, and I think what you're doing is admirable. So yeah, no, fingers crossed that your journey accelerates as well.
It will. I might have to hit you back for some more learning because you've accelerated so much more than me. So yeah, I really appreciate your time because yeah, we all learn from each other. So thank you.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. Have
Cool.
a great weekend though, and I
You
hope
too, mate.
that's been super, super useful.
It really has, and I'll see you later. See you later.
Cheers, Shona. Okay,
Bye.
bye. Bye now.